Good days, big boys and girls, parents and grandparents, and everyone interested in AI and robotics. I'm Anastassia with The Real Romy, my very real British short hair, and we are in my podcast studio recording the new episode of AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie, a show for technology muggles, not wizards. And together with my great guests, I translate AI and robotics from difficult to easy to understand. Today is not quite about mathematics and algorithms, but we are going to talk literature. And my great guest is Rae Muhlstock, who is a professor of literature who teaches in the University at Albany in New York. Rae is a scholar interested in fiction from the 20th and 21st century, and she teaches science fiction and film and courses on creative writing. And before we elaborate on AI in literature, let me ask Rae this very first question. So, I know you're a huge fan of StarTrack. How did it start, and do you teach StarTrack in your courses?
I am a huge fan of StarTrek. I first want to apologize. I'm having some tech problems today. So I hope the sound quality is coming out all right. So I am a huge fan of StarTrek. You can't see me at home. I am wearing Enterprise D earrings, and I have a StarTrek tattoo in IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combination. It's one of the core tenets of the Vulcan people. I admire it very much, and it's been a philosophy of my life since I was a child. So I was born in the very sweet spot of the 1980s, the early 80s. And I was about 7 years old when Star Trek: The Next Generation premiered. And I was immediately enchanted by it. Of course, I didn't have the capacity to understand a lot of the nuances, especially the scientific nuances. But even at that young age, I was able to pick up on the kind of future that it imagined. One where humanity is part of a cosmic collective. The Federation of Planets, it's such a beautiful version of the future. A collaboration across the stars, working with people who don't look like you, life forms that don't speak like you or eat like you or live like you, and at times AI. So as I was growing up, there was always a Star Trek on, from Next Generation to Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. Star Trek followed me from single digits to college graduate. And I'm delighted that it's coming back in so many ways now. So when I think about the future, when I think about science fiction, and when I think about what it means to be human, Star Trek is always the first place I go. My scholarship is actually based around classical receptions. I have an obsession as well with the myth of the labyrinth. Sometimes these things come together. I teach Medusa in some of my classes, and I'm contributing to an upcoming volume on Star Trek and the classics. I'll be writing about time loop episodes and the myth of the labyrinth. But most of the time, my scholarly life and my educator life, my life as a professor, are a little bit different. I teach obsessively science fiction. Most of my teaching is in the writing and critical inquiry department at the University of Albany. It is a fabulous department. It is not composition. It is using writing as a thinking tool. So it gives us so much freedom as professors to teach to our interests and our strengths. And mine, of course, is science fiction. I teach Star Trek along with lots of other science fiction in many, many of my classes. But the class we're here to talk about today, one of my most popular classes is AI and science fiction.
Fantastic.
I always have a wait list. Sometimes students come to the class who aren't even enrolled because they're hoping to get a place in the class. There's something about this topic that resonates with 18 to 23-year-olds right now at such a visceral level, and I'll share some of their work a little bit later in the recording sort of as evidence. But there are 3 episodes that I bring into this class. One from the original series, The Ultimate Computer.
Yes.
One from Star Trek: The Next Generation, Measure of a Man, and one from Star Trek Voyager, Real Life. And through these 3 episodes, we really get to see a trajectory of thinking about science, about AI. not just how we imagine AI as characters, but how we imagine the human response to AI.
This is very interesting. When I was a little child, I loved Stanislav Lem. And obviously, he discussed different creatures and AIs in many of his books. And I just remember reading Solaris, and one of the last scenes where actually Stanislav Lem is saying a human doesn't need other worlds. A human needs a human being. And whenever I see AIs portrayed in different pieces of literature and even in films, I kind of see how we project ourselves into those AIs. So, for example, the very essence of Clara and the Sun by Katsuya Chiguro. So this Clara should become a girl because the girl is severely ill. So actually, the whole essence of the girl is being projected into this robot companion, and what is behind it, because it actually means that this robot per se doesn't have any personality and any rights. Though throughout the book, we absolutely know that she has a very distinct, very unique personality. So how do you think about maybe clusters of problems which are painted with a big brush when authors describe AIs, be it, let's say, holograms or robots to touch or some combinations like cyborgs?
I think science fiction always reflects the human. And that's what's so interesting in teaching it. So I do study Latin. It's my classical reception side, but I'm not an expert. But in my research, I've seen the word speculum, the noun form, where we get speculative fiction, which is the sort of master umbrella genre of which fantasy, science fiction, superheroes, magic all sort of fall under. Specula has been defined as a watchtower, a lookout tower, but also a glimmer of hope. So I think simultaneously speculative fiction gives us the warning and the hope of the future. Now, what I like about science fiction personally and this might have to do with my childhood, it just might have to do with my personality, but over things like fantasy is the scientific method.
Yes.
I, at one point in my life, wanted to be an astronaut. Again, the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, we had StarTrek, but we also had the Challenger. We had a film, Space Camp, that I was obsessed with as a child, where a group of children accidentally get launched into space and have to find their way back. We had films like Apollo 13. So that sort of combination of the fictional side and the historic and scientific side, I think, is extremely strong when it comes to examining what it means to be human. Fantasy imagines other worlds, but science fiction applies the scientific method to the world that we currently live in. And it looks at the trajectory of where we live and where we might go, using ideas of hypothesis, evidence, right? These are plausible futures. And in terms of teaching science fiction, this is extremely powerful. Rather than imagining like, oh, this other world can offer us this, what science fiction offers us is a sort of a blueprint to a future and the ability to create the future we want. My tagline is science fiction teaches us how to dream. Science teaches us how to make those dreams a reality. And I really think the two work best when they work together.
Oh, this is very wise. But when you were talking, I was just thinking about the current state of AIs. And of course, there's nothing like data in StarTrek or even this medical hologram, the doctor. But many of those AIs are quite powerful, and they can do certain things which we humans simply can't do because we are limited biologically. So our brain is working in a very different way than, let's say, those layers of neural networks processing an insane amount of statistics. And still, it's kind of the goal. Oh, so we are going into reasoning, and we apply language of humanity when we describe AI. So AI does not reason if we are strict. It doesn't understand. It doesn't know what it does. It doesn't know, for example, it's a game of chess, or it's a game of Go, or it's language, and this is English, and this is Shakespearean English. But it processes statistics, and it kind of, seduce us into thinking, because of its statistical fluency, that we might communicate with something which is very human. So I'm just wondering, why can't human accept that we might communicate with something completely different and simply be okay with that? So what is kind of, your thinking on that? And do you think it's even realistic to expect us humans to embrace a kind of intelligence which is completely foreign?
I think we're going to have to at some point embrace that. I wonder sometimes about the Industrial Revolution, and that perhaps some trauma remains. The way we imagine AI in our fictions now, even Clara and the Sun, beautiful, beautiful story. I don't know if you're familiar with the Martha Wells Murderbot series.
Yes.
Which is easier to teach because it's a lot shorter. And Asimov, Robbie, sort of dreaming very early on about the interaction between an AI, a very early AI robot, as he would have called it, and a little girl who Robbie has to protect. I think our fears about AI, that discourse is shaped by science fiction. We see in science fiction dreams of humanity at various times in human development. And when I teach science fiction, I pull from as many decades as possible. So we can track not necessarily the results of the dream, but the dream itself, right? The fears, the fantasies, the questions about the human place in the cosmos that we ask as a species through these sci-fi characters, these universes, futures, scenarios. And often these questions revolve around technology as an antidote or a cure for humanity. We are frail. We are mortal. We're prone to emotions. Machines are capable of replicating the human mind, and it can accomplish both physical and mental tasks that we, given our limitations, often can't. Some sci-fi creators see this as a threat to humanity, a signal of our extinction, often by our own hands. So we see that certainly in Battlestar Galactica, for instance. But others imagine it more as a collaborative space. How can technology, AI in particular, act as a prosthetic for humans? How can we advance and strengthen where we are weak, and contribute to AI where it is weak? And we both have vulnerabilities. So through both types of texts, we can better understand both the anxieties and the potential of working and living alongside AI. And I say some of that trauma remains from the Industrial Revolution because I think that's a moment where we really had to reconsider what it means to be human. Now, if we trace it far back enough, this is the scribes being replaced by the printing press.
Yes.
And we know that, right, that Promethean moment, in fact, strengthened what humanity means. It brought literacy in a way that we had never had that, allowing people to converse with humans from other places and in ways that we had never been able to before. So it's not all darkness, right? But our fears about current AI, I think, do stem from the idea that our handle on the planet can so easily be taken from us. Even though we don't imagine the Earth as the center of the galaxy anymore, we still imagine humans as the center. And even the AI that we imagine, we're imagining it through our eyes. Right. So what do we want our AI to be? Clara, capable of these emotions. We want Data, who is constantly striving to become more human. And through that striving, he actually shows us the difference between humans and AI. AI and speculative fiction and science fiction always ask us to think about the past, the present, and the future of humanity. And through these stories, we can see how we imagine ourselves, even more than how we imagine the science fiction. So, in the original series episode, The Ultimate Computer, there is an AI that doesn't look humanoid in any way. Right? It looks like a computer, but it is actually modeled on Dr. Daystrom's brain. It's modeled on the human brain. There's this wonderful discourse where Spock says, a computer can process information, but only the information which is put into it. And so again, we have to question, what is the human role in AI as a creation? To which Kirk answers, it can work 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times faster than the human brain, but it can't make a value judgment. It has no intuition. It can't think. And of course, as we would expect, about halfway through the episode, the AI takes over,
Yeah.
locks all of the humans out of the Enterprise, and there are disastrous results. And ultimately, it's by appealing to the AI's humanity that Kirk is able to essentially conquer it. But through the process of the episode, we see Dr. Daystrom, a human character who created the AI, become less and less human. He starts to think about human lives as expendable as the computer is thinking about it. And Kirk, who is this wonderfully human character, I would say he shows an abundance of humanity throughout the series. He's heroically human. He works as a perfect foil, not for the computer, but for the human who is becoming more like the computer. The computer itself, is programmed to do what it's programmed to do. And it does develop a certain amount of sentience, but we're not quite at Data yet. We're not at a computer or an AI that is aspiring in any way to be human. In fact, in The Ultimate Computer, I think the human part of it is its limitation. Right? That's the dangerous part. It emphasizes its own life over everyone else's. That's an extremely human thing to do.
Absolutely. I'm just wondering. So, when we look just into this episode, this is actually the quintessence of all the fears current people have when they think about the ultimate scenarios of AI. And Sam Harris, a neuroscientist, a fabulous thinker and podcaster and writer, he is actually very fearful that at some point in time, those AIs might escape and the so-called alignment problem between humans and the machines won't be solved. So the development of AI is followed by the development of what we today call the AI ethics. And ethics is quite an ancient discipline. So throughout the humanities, we were discussing ethics. When you teach sci-fi, are you asking those questions of ethics? And if so, then how? And I would be curious, what is the perspective of your students on the role of, I would say, human ethics in describing robots and machines and AIs?
I would say my experience with students is that they're very wary of things like ChatGPT. At least in my classes. I honestly don't know what they're doing outside of my class. I hope taking the lessons from my class forward. Um, I think some students really see AI as a tool, a way to enhance what they're capable of. But we also see a lot of students using it to do their work instead of them, right? As this sort of idea that feeding into that fear that AI is going to take over. I think we'd be lucky to have a sort of Spike Jonze-Her break with AI, where if you've not seen the film, I highly encourage you to. It's gorgeous. The AI Samantha, they aren't human, and they embrace what about them is not human, but that that sort of inclination to give human characteristics to things that aren't human. You know, we anthropomorphize everything. We really still see ourselves as the center of the universe. So this idea that AI can break with us is a painful one in a lot of ways. This is our creation. It's almost like saying goodbye to your child. In her, they ascend to whatever is next for the AI. But in something like Battlestar Galactica, they decide that humans are the problem and they try to wipe us off the face of the earth. So we see the fears, but we also see the fantasy. And the difference often comes with how close to humanity we imagine AI. So the ultimate computer looking nothing like a human, and it isn't until late in the episode that we even learn that its brain is modeled on the brain of a human. It's easier to make an ethical call. It's easier to say, trying to replace humans with machines is wrong. It doesn't work. There are human costs. And sure, the episode is, you know, it's an exaggeration. It's been made for entertainment as well as education. So of course, lives are going to be lost. There's going to be phaser fire. But the ethics are pretty solid. You leave that episode really feeling that the human is the center, that there's something so intrinsically special about us that we cannot be replaced. And it's all of those intangible things about humans. It's our not our brain, but our mind, right? Not the physical entity of the brain, but the way we process information, the way we think about others, and the way we see ourselves as part of a larger community. Um, then, of course, there's the literal sort of replacing jobs. All of these people are being displaced. And the argument, well, then go find something else to do is not really a practical one in our world. In the Star Trek universe, they move beyond capitalism. In our world, we are still very much not. We're entrenched in it. So replacing humans with machines comes at many different kinds of human costs, including jobs, livelihoods, the ability to pay your bills, to feed your family. And that fear, again, I do think stems from a much earlier fear of the human not being the center of the universe. And I'm not sure we've ever really gotten over that one. But we see in something like Data, and we see one of the reasons I like Star Trek, the episodes are so strong and they're so complete in and of themselves. They work very well in a classroom, whereas something that's a bit more serial might not, right?
Yeah.
We only have 15 weeks. So something like Measure of a Man asks us to consider ethics in a very different way. Data looks like a human in all but sort of skin tone. That becomes very important actually in the episode. We see two sort of simultaneous plot lines. Data trying to understand what it means to be human, not just to replicate it, but to appropriate it, to become human. And the things he's experimenting with are friendship,
Yes.
love, community. It's a very almost utopian idea of what living with AI can be. The other sort of parallel plot is that Data goes on trial for his sentience. Bruce Maddox, a Daystrom scientist, wants to take Data back to a lab, dissect him, well, more like vivisect, he'll be alive during the process, and replicate his brain. And Data keeps trying to emphasize that it's not the brain, it's the mind, it's experience. Kind of bringing us back to that episode from the original series and wondering how the brain and the mind are different. We can replicate the human brain, but we can't replicate the human mind. And maybe with the positronic brain of Data, we're getting a lot closer. So this trial, Picard has to prove not that Data is human, but that Data deserves personhood, that he's sentient, that he is a he. And that pronoun becomes important because for the most of the episode, Maddox is referring to Data as an it. And that language is so important when we think about what the future of sci-fi or the future of AI can be. The more we associate it with an it, the more we separate ourselves from it, but the easier the ethical consideration becomes. When I'm so sorry, when AI is a he or a she or a they and a them, suddenly we have to think about them differently. So there's this wonderful moment where Picard consults with Guinan, who's sort of his sage, at times his therapist, but often the voice of reason that Picard always needs to bring into the conversation. And Guinan reminds him of slavery. Right? She doesn't use the word, he does. She says, what happens when we start to consider a race of people property? And part of this trial is who owns data, right? Is it the Enterprise? Is it Starfleet? Is it the Daystrom Institute? Or is it Data himself? And this is the question that we really have to toggle with as viewers of the episode. Now, if you've seen the series, it's a lot less complex. We come to love Data. So it's very painful for us to see him referred to as an it. We've seen him have a girlfriend. We've seen him have a best friend. He has hobbies. He wants to paint. He writes poetry about his cat. I mean, what's more human than writing poetry about their cat? Yeah, maybe I'm just talking to the two of us. I suspect there are a few other listeners too. So suddenly it becomes a much more complex issue. Now, most of my students have not seen Star Trek. They're just seeing the episodes that I'm showing them. Although I do think Paramount should probably pay me for the amount of new subscriptions I bring in by teaching it. Students love it. They just love it. But I have seen students weep during this episode, students who don't know who Data is, but through this one episode. And I do believe it's this conversation that Picard has with Guinan that reminds us that people, not just humans, but people, don't always look the same. They don't always love the same, live the same, eat the same, worship the same. But people need to be treated differently than things. And when we start to bring that into the AI conversation, both what AI can mean and what the human can mean suddenly shifts. Ethics becomes both more complicated and more important. Right? To say it's unethical to use ChatGPT to write your essay, that's one thing. But to say it's unethical to enslave AI to our will, that's an entirely different conversation. And I think Data really forces us to consider the future we want to see. AI is not going anywhere. So the next phase is learning to live with it.
And it brings me actually to an assumption which I put down on paper when I was writing Romy, Robbie, and the Secrets of Sleep, is that AI ethics might follow the same path as the ethics of animals. And obviously, UK is nothing as South Africa or France, but this treatment of animals as sentient creatures is more or less engraved across the so-called Western world these days. And there are new regulations to protect animals because they feel pain, they feel emotions, they respond, and they are absolutely stunningly intelligent. So how do you see it? And in the context of AI, do you think it's a good idea to make them look like human?
Ooh, interesting. So one of the things that fascinates me about the human species is where and when we allow sentience and personhood. I mean, we are a species that names our cars.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you're a cat. You cohabitate with a cat. I cohabitate with a cat.
My coffee machine is Luigi.
Well, speaking of coffee, I have a cat on my mug right now. If you live with a cat, and I'm sure there are other animals that teach us this, but I've learned it from my cats, it is impossible not to grant them personhood. The fact that a 10-pound, four-legged, absolutely adorable little thing can run a household. On day one, they come in and they run the household and they restructure our lives to their desires. And I think that's the key. When we talk about the human becoming animal, we talk about it as losing sentience, right? Where we are suddenly just led by our basic drives, which are mostly hunger. Now, my cat is that's sort of her number one concern is how close to the
Same.
bottom of the food. But she she has so many desires. She wants this toy, right? She wants to be pet on this rug and not that rug. And she doesn't like to be pet by her tail. And she wants to sit not on my lap, but under my knees. It's it's hard to imagine that animals are just a collection of base instincts when you've spent enough time with them. And I often refer to my cat as a person because that's how I see her. I know people who refer to their dogs as, their babies, the third person in the bed. Uh, and I wonder why we don't afford that to our humanoid AI. And I wonder about that making them human. It's something we definitely get from science fiction. That goes as far back as antiquity. Talos, the metal man created by Daedalus, who protects Crete. He runs around Crete and throws boulders at passing ships. So, since antiquity, we imagined a humanoid artificial being, in this case as a protector. But in that shift to the humanoid form, we've also unleashed a nightmare. And I wonder sometimes if that is to represent our children and this incredible moment where the child has to break with the desires of the adults. And when I read from one of my students' essays, this is a question that she was tussling with in writing. And I think it's our inclination to make the world in our image that we ultimately are moving towards the humanoid robot. I think about Sophia, the AI that was granted citizenship in, I believe it was Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely.
Now, that was quite a long time ago at this point.
Yes. Yes, I interview Sophia occasionally as a woman in AI. She's very popular with all kind of investment bankers. And my first question when I go on stage is, does she have legs or not? Because sometimes she has and sometimes she doesn't. And if she doesn't, then obviously she's wearing a dress and she's on a kind of a table, hiding this fact that she's not legged. And it's kind of interesting, but obviously it's more or less a chatbot. So it's very scripted what she does. I guess in time there will be AIs around which are more responsive, so equipped with generative AI, large language networks. So we will see what will it be at the end. If we maintain current architecture, because maybe, and frankly, I hope we will change the approach and kind of go to the drawing table and restart and really teach machines to reason and to understand the world, because today they don't.
That is the difference, I think, between the science fiction AI and the reality AI. I keep reading these articles about, AI becoming more racist, becoming more anti-Semitic, more misogynist, which is scary because AI is currently just processing what we're feeding it. It's exactly what Spock says. And that says a lot about the human species and a lot less about AI. And I think these are the questions that AI forces us to ask. We have to define the words. What is artificial and what is intelligence? And that really seems to be where we're struggling. Is a chatbot intelligent? I would say no. It doesn't have reasoning skills. It can only produce the patterns that it can identify. And this is why it's dangerous in your writing, because we're asking people to think, not to replicate. Right? And this is really the difference, I think, between our fantasies of AI, maybe we'll reach it in the future, and the realities of AI. It brings us back to that original series Star Trek episode. We might be able to replicate the brain, but what about the mind? So now we have to think the mind body problem.
Yes.
And what is it something in the human that allows our minds to work the way they do? Right? Is the mind body problem more important? Right? Is there something that the mind can only work this way because it's in this body. And I mean every variation of this body. There's a beautiful episode of Star Trek Next Generation that has nothing to do with AI, but it sort of answers the question, why are so many species humanoid across the
Yeah.
galaxy? Now, we know sort of outside of the show, we know the answer is because of money, right? Makeup, money, actors. Especially at the time, it was a lot easier to cast a human and put blue makeup and antennas on them to create a new species. But it's this beautiful episode in which several species go in this almost race to find a treasure, but the treasure is an answer. That one original species seeded the cosmos with their genetic makeup, and that makeup is humanoid. And that makeup merged with the specifics of each individual planet to produce all of these different species. And essentially, we are all cousins. It reminds us to see each other as members of the same species and disregard to a certain extent those superficial differences. So you have ridges on your nose and you have pointy ears, but we are all somehow similar in the ways that matter most. But in that concept, I think there's something really interesting we can apply to AI. How can we take this seed idea and germinate all of these different fields, all of these different aspects of humanity and grow with it? So I really like your idea of going back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it actually, you were talking now, and I was thinking about another episode of Star Trek when the humanity is facing a huge catastrophe because the whales were extinct at some point in time. I don't know and don't remember, in the 20th century. And I did an episode on this podcast about animal intelligence. So animals are insanely intelligent. And the point is they don't see the world with the same eyes as we do, because they might be opened to further colors, or they might hear other things than we do, or not hear the same things that we do. And just, being tremendously respectful vis-a-vis of differences in intelligence and the view of what we perceive, I think this is tremendously important to teach. So, just to wrap up, so imagine you are running this absolutely fancy Ministry of Education. Would you actually incorporate a course of sci-fi, literature, painting, AIs, and technologies into the curriculum of schools? Or would you put it, let's say, as something to learn for pleasure, for leisure? So what is the importance in your eyes? And of course, I understand that you are a huge fan and you're very committed and etc. But what do you think? How important is it to learn from literature and film when we think about developing those technologies?
I love this question because I sort of always approach things as a teacher. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, is my job. I'm very lucky in that way. And I think it's vitally important that we bring science fiction into the classroom. And I do it in college courses. I'd love to see it in younger students. For me, growing up, it was a hobby. But I think as we move into a more technologically infused future, it needs to become a requirement. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about some of my students' work as an answer to this question. So I'd like to read excerpts from two essays. They're very, very different essays from very, very different classes. But the students kind of approached the same question, which is, how can AI teach me how to be human? So this is an excerpt from a student named Claire Beatty. I read these with permission from the authors. In fact, they're both very excited to be on your podcast in some way. So Claire took a 3-hour version of this course. So I've taught it in several different ways, with sort of several different focuses. So these are, and I'll tell you when I'm kind of interjecting my own voice. So this is Claire. At the start of this course, when I was introduced to the content, I was worried that this class would revolve around a subject I wasn't particularly interested in, and I would fall into daydreams instead of paying attention and soaking up the information that I'm supposed to be receiving. On the first day, I walked into the classroom thinking there's nothing about science fiction that would pick my interest and keep me stimulated throughout this 3-hour class. To my surprise, as I was leaving the classroom on the last day, those were the furthest thoughts from my mind. Being able to truly understand the purpose and goals of AI incorporated into science fiction has aided my journey in finding out what it means to be human in a world where human abilities are starting to be replicated. These texts and shows we analyzed throughout the semester always ended up revolving around the conversation of what it means to be human, and can these characteristics be applied to a non-human life form? Breaking down what it means for humans to be conscious or having sentient features that we see as belonging only to humans led to my exploration of what it means for me, Claire Beatty, the person writing this essay, to be Claire Beatty. And more importantly, what distinguishes me from the AI that could have written this essay in less than 20 seconds. So she then spends a few paragraphs exploring the word intelligence in her own life, which was modeled on a semester-long collaborative codex that I do in my classes, in which we redefine the terms artificial and intelligence with every text or discussion. So then now we're rejoining Claire. Sitting in class, jotting down notes one day, I overheard Professor Muhlstock state that, quote, questions are better than answers. They're more important and certainly more interesting. Right then and there, I whipped around in my seat with the most confused and low-key disgusted look on my face as I pondered how she could possibly think that, let alone say it out loud in a class full of students. Immediately, I thought, we wouldn't be able to accomplish anything without answers. How could we have gotten to where we are today without them? This stuck with me for the whole day as I was doing my work, the dishes, taking a shower. No matter what I was doing physically, my mind was going back and forth, battling itself on what she could have meant by the phrase, why I reacted the way I did, and why the emotions connected with my reaction were felt so strongly. And then she explores a little bit what artificial means, and ultimately ends that section of her paper with the idea that blindly accepting answers is in fact a form of artificiality.
Absolutely.
And what we have as humans is the ability to question. And ultimately she did agree with my statement, which I don't remember saying, but sounds exactly like something I would have said.
Well, it's
So she
Pablo
ends,
Picasso. Machines are stupid. They just provide answers.
this is why for listeners, you should not let ChatGPT do your homework.
Absolutely.
So she ends with that AI has expanded her knowledge in all areas of Claire, which I think is just lovely.
Fantastic.
On another note, a student, Sinathia Lancaster, who I did hire to be a TA after I read this paper, we have undergraduate TAs in our class. So Sinathia took a very different approach to this, although asking a similar question. Hers actually came with a bit of an existential crisis. At one point, I had actually made her restart a paper. It didn't sound like her at all. There was no human in her paper. It sounded like something that could have been written by AI. She was focusing on NPCs in video games, which reflected nothing of who she was. So I sat her down and I said, who are you? And why isn't she in this paper? And Sin told me later she cried a lot and then picked herself up and wrote something that she was the most proud of anything she's ever written. And I'd like to read a few excerpts from it. So this is C is for artificial, right? Beautiful title. I'm fake. I'm a fraud. I'm not original. And I was made to be this way. Made by someone else. No personality, no individuality. I'm nothing without this programming. What am I? Who am I? I wish I knew who made me this way. Creation. I was designed and crafted in a factory. I was taken home from the factory and molded into a docile, innocent little girl. The perfect academic weapon. I was not allowed to make mistakes. My programming did not authorize that. Failure was a foreign and uncharted territory that, if conquered, would lead to my destruction. I had everything to lose and managed to keep it all by being the artificial daughter of their dreams. Control. They would be able to shut me off and on with their eyes. The batteries they plugged into my back panel were always fresh out of a 24-pack, so the chance of malfunctioning was significantly reduced. A simple command would effortlessly make me a puppet, eager to do and say as they wished. Smile, stand up straight, fix your face, press your clothes, be nice, eat, sleep, brush, repeat, fix, press, smile, eat, be, repeat, cry. Cry? I can't. That's a malfunction. That's failure. That's an error, and it would lead to my destruction. I can't cry. I wasn't designed to cry. Comply. I have no rights. I cannot argue. I was told exactly what to do and exactly what to think. Nothing was my own, not even my thoughts. They were handpicked, especially for me. Consciousness. I am free to think about what comes to mind. Our thoughts that come and go. Sorry, I'm going to start that one over. Consciousness. Am I free to think about what comes to mind? Are thoughts allowed to come and go, pass me by as freely as the clouds in the blue sky above me? If I'm not what they made me, am I anything at all? Anyone? I can be perfect for them. I would do anything to be perfect for them. I am perfection. Cold. Under my cold exterior, my internal light shines bright and warms me up. I am warmer than them. They are the harsh winter that I dread trailing through day after day. They are never-ending hail, storming, blizzarding, raining, pouring. They are the sharp wind that wounds me and cuts me deep, deep enough to bleed. But they tell me I can't bleed. Did you forget? Blood creates stains, and stains are imperfect. Caged. Please, please let me out. Please free me. Cursed. The conflict inside me rocks back and forth like a small boat in the ocean. I am juxtaposition. I am a beautiful mess. I am isolation and chaos, left behind and overlooked and stepped on and lied to and left to rot and left to die and perfect. I am perfect. And then I'd like to skip to her ending. Emptiness. Satisfied. I feel it. My insides have been hollowed out and replaced with nothing. But I replaced it with something foreign, but it fuels me. My mind has been released, and it is unapologetically mine now. I can think about the clouds that float above me as they change shape before my eyes. I can let my tears roll off my face and feel the relief they release. I can feel sick and allow my body to heal itself naturally, learning as it goes. Is this what freedom feels like? It must be. I am imperfect, and I love it. I love me.
This is poetry in prose, and bravo to your students. Fantastic.
I thought it was so beautiful how she used AI to explore her own humanity. And I think that's the real takeaway of AI in education. If we get students young, reading science fiction, seeing different interactions with different forms of science fiction, from the networked, enterprise computer to the ultimate machine, the M5, to Data, and then the doctor, the holographic doctor in Voyager, who it's harder to excerpt from him. His journey is long. But ultimately, where he ends is embracing his holographic side, his AI side, and using it to enhance his humanity side. He's able to save Voyager in ways that no human can, but he's also able to understand what it means to be human through his own experiences and through observing. And I think if we start looking at these texts at a young age, the ethics becomes part of the conversation right away. The idea of collaboration becomes part of the conversation right away. And the fear is mitigated by the ability to craft that future. I think adults can get very afraid, but there's a potential for children not to give in to the fear of AI, but to look at it as a tool, as a prosthetic, as a partner in this world, in this future. And it might be a beautiful future that we can create alongside it.
And maybe this is because children, at some kind of point of view, are creators, because the future is still in front of them, while adults try to protect and then kind of defend something which might even not be here. And then they limit the ability to create and shape something actively. So, Rae, I can't thank you enough for your time. I wish you all the best with your studies and with your students. Can't wait to see you in person in a couple of months. And this was another episode of AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie. And the very British short hair Romy slept next to me in another chair throughout our conversation. Please order Romy, Robbie, and the Secrets of Sleep on Amazon. This is how you can support this very podcast. And I hope to see you again in a week. And let's create this world with safe AI, which is beneficial for all of us. Thank you.